thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cry, cry, cry in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me. I wanted to be you so bad. Your life looked like so much fun. The fashion lights and fancy things made it seem like you had won. But little did I know, you were crying all the time. You were hurting inside when everyone thought you were fine. I thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cry, cry, cry in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me. I know you made some mistakes, but we're all only human. You were judged for everything. They put the blame on you when you were pushed over the edge. It ain't right what they allege. I thought you were so lucky, but the lucky one was me. I thought you were so lucky because you were a star, but you cry, cry, cry in the lonely dark. And I'm sorry for what you went through. I always thought the lucky one was you, but the lucky one was me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that often elevates the notion of being good. We are taught from a young age that to be good is the ultimate moral achievement, to be kind, gentle, and pleasing in all aspects of life. But what does it truly mean to be good, and at what cost do we pursue this ideal? Many of us have been conditioned to think that being good is the same as being virtuous, yet these two qualities are not always the same. In fact, there is a problem with being good that is rarely discussed. The problem lies not in the pursuit of goodness itself, but in the misunderstanding of what it requires and the consequences it imposes. Being good, as defined by societal norms, can sometimes mean surrendering our deeper convictions, diluting our sense of purpose, or becoming complacent in the face of moral challenges. It can lead to a life that is safe but shallow, outwardly peaceful but inwardly conflicted. The pursuit of goodness can trap us in a cycle of pleasing others at the expense of our own integrity, leaving us feeling hollow despite our well-meaning intentions. Tonight I invite you to reflect on this concept, what it means to be good, what it costs, and how we can approach goodness in a way that is true, not just pleasing. It is not enough to merely be good by the world's standards. We must aim for something higher, something more aligned with the truth, even if it challenges the very foundations upon which our lives are built. The danger of superficial goodness. The notion of superficial goodness is one that pervades much of modern life. We are taught that being good is about external actions, helping others, showing kindness, and avoiding conflict. But in our eagerness to fulfill these societal expectations, we often neglect the internal landscape of our souls. Superficial goodness is driven by the desire for approval, the need to be seen as virtuous, rather than a true understanding of what it means to live with integrity. When we focus solely on external goodness, we risk becoming hypocritical, acting in ways that are pleasing to others but disconnected from our own beliefs and values. The desire to be seen as good can become a prison, one that confines us to a life of pretense. We smile when we feel like frowning, we agree when we know we should dissent, and we offer kindness even when it feels forced. In doing so, we lose touch with our true selves, becoming actors on a stage where the audience dictates our every move. The danger of superficial goodness is that it often leads to resentment. We give, but with a begrudging heart. We help, but with the hope of being acknowledged. Over time, this kind of goodness wears us down, leaving us bitter and disillusioned. We become frustrated by the lack of reciprocity, by the fact that our efforts to be good seem to go unnoticed or unappreciated. But the truth is, it is not the world that has failed to acknowledge our goodness, It is we who have failed to pursue a goodness that is genuine and rooted in truth. True goodness is not about performing for others, but about aligning our actions with our deepest convictions. It requires us to be honest even when honesty is difficult. It calls us to act with integrity, even when it means facing conflict or disapproval. And it demands that we prioritize the state of our own souls over the opinions of others. Superficial goodness may win us temporary approval, but it will never bring us lasting peace. The cost of always being good. To be always good in the eyes of others comes at a great cost. It demands that we suppress our emotions, our desires, and our individuality in order to fit into the mold that society has created for us. The cost of always being good is often the loss of authenticity. We become so concerned with how others perceive us that we forget who we truly are. Our thoughts, actions, and words are filtered through the lens of what we believe will make us appear good, rather than what is true or necessary. One of the most insidious aspects of this is that we begin to live in fear of judgment, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as anything less than perfect. We lose the courage to speak up when something is wrong, to stand firm in our convictions, or to challenge the status quo. In our desire to be good, we become passive, allowing ourselves to be shaped by the expectations of others rather than by our own moral compass. There is a great irony in the cost of being good. In our quest to be virtuous, we may actually distance ourselves from true virtue. We may avoid necessary confrontations, choosing instead to keep the peace at all costs. But peace without truth is not peace at all. It is merely a veneer, a fragile facade that can shatter at any moment. True goodness requires courage to be disliked, the courage to say no, the courage to stand alone when necessary. The cost of always being good is not just a loss of authenticity, but also a loss of growth. When we prioritize being good over being real, we avoid the challenges that lead to personal development. We remain stagnant, stuck in a cycle of people-pleasing that stifles our potential. True growth requires us to embrace discomfort, to take risks, and to confront the parts of ourselves that need to be refined. Being good may make us comfortable, but it will never make us whole. Goodness without boundaries. One of the most dangerous pitfalls of striving to be good is the failure to establish boundaries. We are often taught that to be good means to be selfless, to give endlessly without expecting anything in return. While generosity and kindness are indeed virtues, they can become destructive when exercised without limits. Goodness without boundaries leads to burnout, resentment, and ultimately a breakdown of the very relationships we seek to nurture. When we fail to set boundaries, we open ourselves up to exploitation. People may take advantage of our desire to be good, using our kindness as a means to further their own interests. Over time, this can leave us feeling drained and unappreciated, as though our efforts to be good are never enough. But the truth is, it is not our goodness that is lacking, it is our failure to protect our own well-being in the process. Goodness without boundaries also leads to a lack of self-respect. When we consistently put the needs of others above our own, we begin to devalue ourselves. We may think that by sacrificing our own desires and well-being, we are being noble, but in reality we are neglecting our own worth. True goodness does not require us to diminish ourselves in order to uplift others. It is possible to be kind and generous while also maintaining a strong sense of self. Establishing boundaries is not a sign of selfishness, but a necessary component of healthy relationships. It allows us to give from a place of abundance rather than depletion. When we set limits on what we are willing to give, we protect our own well-being and ensure that our acts of kindness are sustainable. Boundaries allow us to preserve our own integrity while still offering genuine goodness to the world. The temptation of moral superiority. One of the greatest temptations in the pursuit of goodness is the lure of moral superiority. When we strive to be good, It is all too easy to fall into the trap of believing that our goodness makes us better than others. We may begin to judge those who do not live up to the same standards, viewing them as lesser or unworthy of respect. This sense of superiority not only damages our relationships with others, but it also distorts our understanding of true goodness. Moral superiority is often subtle, creeping into our thoughts and attitudes without us even realizing it. We may start to take pride in our acts of kindness, viewing them as evidence of our own virtue. We may look down on those who make different choices or who struggle in ways we do not. But true goodness is never about elevating ourselves above others. It is about recognizing our shared humanity, our common struggles, and our mutual need for grace. The problem with moral superiority is that it blinds us to our own flaws. When we believe that we are better than others, we stop examining our own hearts. We become complacent, convinced that we have already achieved the pinnacle of virtue. But true goodness requires humility, the recognition that we are all imperfect, that we all fall short, and that we are all in need of growth. Moral superiority is the opposite of true goodness, for it leads us to pride rather than to compassion. If we are to pursue true goodness, we must resist the temptation to compare ourselves to others. Our worth is not determined by how we measure up to those around us, but by the sincerity of our own hearts. True goodness does not seek recognition or validation. It seeks only to do what is right, even when no one is watching. The complexity of human nature. Human nature is complex, and so too is the pursuit of goodness. We are not purely good or purely bad, but a mixture of both. To ignore this complexity is to oversimplify what it means to be human. We may strive for goodness, but we are also capable of selfishness, anger, and fear. The problem with being good is that it often fails to account for this complexity, leading us to ignore or suppress the parts of ourselves that do not fit neatly into the category of good. When we strive to be good, we may feel pressure to deny our darker impulses, to pretend that we are always kind, patient, and generous. But denying these aspects of ourselves does not make them disappear. In fact, it often causes them to manifest in unhealthy ways through passive aggression, resentment, or even self-sabotage. True goodness requires us to acknowledge the full range of our humanity, to confront our flaws and weaknesses with honesty rather than denial. The complexity of human nature also means that goodness is not always straightforward. There are times when what is good in one situation may not be good in another. Life is full of moral dilemmas, where the right course of action is not always clear. To pursue true goodness, we must be willing to wrestle with these complexities, to seek wisdom rather than relying on simple rules or formulas. True goodness is not about being perfect, but about being real. It requires us to embrace the messiness of life, to accept that we will sometimes fail, and to extend grace to ourselves and others in the process. When we acknowledge the complexity of human nature, we free ourselves from the burden of trying to be perfect and open ourselves up to the possibility of true growth, goodness, and self-deception. In our pursuit of goodness, it is all too easy to deceive ourselves. We may convince ourselves that we are acting out of kindness when, in reality, we are motivated by a desire for approval or recognition. We may believe that we are being generous when, in truth, we are giving out of guilt or obligation. Self-deception is one of the most insidious obstacles to true goodness, for it allows us to believe that we are virtuous even when our actions are driven by less noble motives. Self-deception often begins with small compromises. We tell ourselves that it is okay to bend the truth if it spares someone's feelings, or that it is acceptable to avoid confrontation in the name of keeping the peace. But over time, these small compromises accumulate, leading us further and further from true integrity. We become so adept at justifying our actions that we lose sight of what is truly right. The problem with self-deception is that it creates a false sense of goodness. We may believe that we are living up to the moral standards we have set for ourselves, but in reality we are falling short. This false sense of goodness can be comforting, for it allows us to avoid the discomfort of self-examination. But true goodness requires us to confront the ways in which we deceive ourselves, to be honest about our motivations and actions. To avoid the trap of self-deception, we must cultivate a habit of self-reflection. We must be willing to examine our hearts with honesty and humility, to acknowledge our flaws and failures, and to seek growth rather than validation. True goodness is not about convincing ourselves that we are perfect, but about striving to be better, even when it is difficult. The role of grace in pursuing goodness. In our pursuit of goodness, we must also recognize the importance of grace. None of us are perfect, and none of us can achieve true goodness on our own. We are all in need of grace, the unearned favor that allows us to grow, to change, and to become better than we are. Without grace, the pursuit of goodness becomes an impossible task, a burden that we cannot bear. Grace allows us to acknowledge our failures without being defined by them. It gives us the freedom to strive for goodness without being crushed by the weight of our imperfections. In a world that often demands perfection, grace reminds us that we are all works in progress, that our worth is not determined by our ability to be good, but by the love and acceptance that we receive from a source greater than ourselves. The role of grace in pursuing goodness is not just about receiving it, but also about extending it to others. When we recognize our own need for grace, we become more compassionate towards the failings of others. We are less likely to judge, less likely to hold grudges, and more willing to forgive. True goodness is not about demanding perfection from ourselves or others, but about walking in humility and extending grace in the midst of our imperfections. To pursue goodness without grace is to set ourselves up for failure. It is to place a burden on ourselves that we cannot carry. But when we embrace grace, we are freed from the pressure to be perfect, and we are empowered to grow in goodness, not out of fear or obligation, but out of a genuine desire to live in alignment with what is true and right. The importance of discernment in goodness. Goodness is not a one-size-fits-all concept. What is good in one situation may not be good in another, and what appears to be good on the surface may not always be so. This is why discernment is so essential in the pursuit of goodness. Discernment allows us to see beyond the surface, to understand the deeper implications of our actions, and to make choices that are truly aligned with what is right. Without discernment, we may be easily swayed by appearances or by the opinions of others. We may choose to do what seems good in the moment without considering the long-term consequences. We may act out of a desire to please others rather than out of a commitment to what is true. Discernment helps us to navigate the complexities of life, to make wise decisions, and to avoid the pitfalls of superficial goodness. Discernment also allows us to recognize when our pursuit of goodness is leading us astray. There are times when our desire to be good can blind us to the reality of a situation. We may believe that we are acting out of kindness, when in fact we are enabling harmful behavior. We may think that we are being selfless, when in reality we are neglecting our own well-being. Discernment helps us to see the bigger picture, to recognize when our actions are truly aligned with goodness, and when they are not. The importance of discernment in pursuing goodness cannot be overstated. It requires us to be thoughtful, reflective, and intentional in our actions. It calls us to seek wisdom, to be open to correction, and to prioritize truth over appearance. Without discernment, the pursuit of goodness can become a shallow and misguided endeavor. But with discernment, we can navigate the complexities of life with wisdom and integrity. Goodness and the fear of failure. One of the greatest obstacles to pursuing true goodness is the fear of failure. We may be so afraid of falling short of the standards we have set for ourselves that we avoid taking risks, we avoid difficult conversations, and we avoid confronting the parts of ourselves that need to change. The fear of failure can paralyze us, keeping us stuck in a cycle of complacency and mediocrity. But true goodness requires us to confront this fear head-on. It requires us to embrace the possibility of failure, to recognize that growth often comes through our mistakes and shortcomings. The fear of failure is rooted in a misunderstanding of what it means to be good. Being good is not about being perfect, it is about striving for what is right, even when we fall short. When we allow the fear of failure to dictate our actions, we become trapped in a cycle of self-preservation. We prioritize our own comfort and security over the pursuit of goodness. We become more concerned with protecting our image than with doing what is right. But true goodness requires us to take risks, to step outside of our comfort zones, and to be willing to fail in the pursuit of something greater. The fear of failure is a natural part of the human experience, but it does not have to define us. When we embrace the possibility of failure, we free ourselves to pursue goodness with courage and determination. We learn to see our failures not as a reflection of our worth, but as opportunities for growth. True goodness is not about never failing, but about continually striving for what is right, even in the face of failure. The problem with perfectionism in goodness. Perfectionism is often seen as a virtue, especially in the pursuit of goodness. We may believe that if we can just be perfect, perfectly kind, perfectly patient, perfectly generous, then we will achieve true goodness. But perfectionism is not a path to goodness, it is a trap. It sets an unattainable standard, one that leaves
you pull me in, no time to waste. With dances, it's all the same. But I'm hooked, can't break the chain. We crash, we burn, we never learn, it's a cycle. I can't discern, but in your arms I lose control. We fall apart, but still I go. Here we go again, spinning in the dark, chasing every high, even if we fall apart. Here we go again, you and me were blind, losing all we got, but it's worth it every time. It's all it takes, no future clear, just the now. But in the fire we're burning out. We crash, we burn, we never learn, it's a cycle. I can't discern, but in your arms I lose control. We fall apart, but still I go. Here we go again, spinning in the dark, chasing every high, even if we fall apart. Here we go again, you and me were blind, losing all we got, but it's worth it every time. Here we go again. Here we go again. We know it's wrong, but we still pretend. Here we go again. You're not having my sweet mistake. We rise and fall, but still we drop. For just one night, it's all we need. Here we go again, we're free. Here we go again, spinning in the dark, chasing every high, even if we fall apart. Here we go again, you and me were blind, losing all we've got, but it's worth it every time. Here we go again. Here we go again. We know it's wrong, but we still pretend. Here we go again.
us feeling frustrated, exhausted, and inadequate. The problem with perfectionism is that it focuses on the end result rather than the process. It is more concerned with appearances than with the state of our hearts. Perfectionism drives us to perform, to meet the expectations of others, rather than to pursue what is truly right. In our quest to be perfect, we lose sight of what it means to be good. Perfectionism also leads to a lack of compassion both for ourselves and for others. When we are consumed by the desire to be perfect, we become harsh and critical, unable to extend grace to ourselves when we fall short. We may also become judgmental towards others, holding them to the same impossible standards that we impose on ourselves. But true goodness requires compassion, the ability to forgive and to accept imperfection as part of the human experience. To pursue goodness without falling into the trap of perfectionism, we must learn to embrace our imperfections. We must recognize that true goodness is not about being flawless, but about being sincere, humble, and committed to growth. Perfectionism may promise us the illusion of goodness, but it will never deliver the peace and fulfillment that come from living with integrity. It is the fragility of human morality. Human morality at its core is fragile. The ideals of goodness are rooted in a moral framework that has been shaped by centuries of philosophical and religious thought. Yet this framework is fragile, susceptible to the pressures of society, personal ambition, and the very nature of human frailty. To be good, truly good, requires an ongoing commitment to principles that are not always easy to follow. The problem, however, lies in the fact that morality is not a fixed entity. It is shaped by culture, time, and circumstance. What is considered good today may not have been regarded as such in the past, and vice versa. In this fluidity of morality, the individual faces an internal struggle. We all wish to believe that we are good people, but the truth is, our actions are often motivated by a mixture of selfishness, fear, and social conformity. Even when we strive to be moral, our motives can be clouded by personal gain or the desire for approval. The fragility of human morality makes it difficult to maintain a consistent standard of goodness, and this inconsistency often leads to disillusionment when the world does not respond in kind to our efforts. Moreover, this fragility is compounded by the external forces that challenge our moral compass. We are constantly bombarded with messages that contradict the ideals of goodness, advertisements that glorify material success, media that reward selfishness, and social dynamics that often elevate power over integrity. In such an environment, being good can feel like an act of rebellion, a quiet resistance against the tides of cynicism and moral relativism. But perhaps the greatest challenge to our morality is not external but internal. Our own desires, insecurities, and weaknesses often lead us to compromise on our values. We may tell ourselves that a small lie or a selfish act is justified in the grand scheme of things, but each compromise chips away at the foundation of our goodness. In the end, the fragility of human morality lies in its vulnerability to both external and internal corruption. And so the problem with being good is that it requires an almost impossible level of vigilance and self-awareness. It demands that we constantly question our motives, examine our actions, and resist the temptation to compromise. In a world that does not always reward goodness, this task can feel overwhelming, leading many to abandon the pursuit altogether. The misunderstanding of goodness. Goodness as a concept is often misunderstood. It is commonly associated with passive traits, kindness, gentleness, and compliance. Yet true goodness is far more complex and often requires a strength of character that is anything but passive. The problem with being good in this sense is that many people mistake goodness for weakness. In a world where assertiveness and dominance are prized, those who embody traditional notions of goodness may be seen as naive or easily manipulated. This misunderstanding of goodness stems from a superficial understanding of what it means to be good. It is easy to equate goodness with simple acts of kindness or generosity, but true goodness requires much more than that. It demands courage, discernment, and often the willingness to stand up against injustice, even when it is unpopular or dangerous to do so. Being good is not about being liked or avoiding conflict. It is about holding fast to principles in the face of adversity. However, the misinterpretation of goodness often leads to frustration and disappointment. Those who strive to be good may find that their efforts are not appreciated, or that they are taken advantage of by others who do not share the same moral convictions. This can lead to a sense of disillusionment, where goodness is seen as a futile endeavor, a trait that is neither rewarded nor respected. Furthermore, this misunderstanding can create an internal conflict for the individual who wishes to be good. On the one hand, they want to live a life of moral integrity, but on the other, they do not want to be perceived as weak or naive. This tension between the desire to be good and the fear of being misunderstood can lead to a kind of moral paralysis, where one is hesitant to act out of fear of being judged or taken advantage of. In the end, the problem with being good is that it is often misunderstood by both society and the individual. Goodness is not about passivity or weakness. It is about strength, conviction, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Yet, as long as goodness is misunderstood, those who strive to live morally upright lives will continue to face challenges and frustrations. The lack of immediate rewards for goodness. One of the most disheartening aspects of being good is the lack of immediate rewards. In many cases, goodness is a long-term investment in a world that values short-term gains. The individual who chooses to act with integrity, kindness, and compassion may find that their efforts go unrecognized, while those who pursue selfish or unethical means achieve success more quickly. This creates a sense of injustice that can lead to bitterness and cynicism. The problem with being good in this context is that it requires patience and faith. One must believe that goodness will ultimately be rewarded, even if that reward is not immediately apparent. Yet this is a difficult mindset to maintain in a society that glorifies quick success and instant gratification. The individual who chooses to be good may find themselves struggling with feelings of inadequacy or failure, especially when they see others around them achieving more through less honorable means. Moreover, the lack of immediate rewards for goodness can lead to a crisis of faith. It is easy to wonder whether goodness is truly worth it when the results are not forthcoming. This is particularly true in situations where the individual faces adversity or injustice despite their best efforts to do what is right. In such cases, the temptation to abandon goodness in favor of more pragmatic or self-serving approaches can be strong. Yet the true value of goodness lies not in immediate rewards, but in the long-term impact it has on both the individual and the world around them. Goodness, though it may not always be recognized or rewarded in the short term, creates a foundation of trust, respect, and moral integrity that can withstand the tests of time. It is a quiet force that shapes character and fosters genuine, lasting relationships. In the end, the problem with being good is that it requires a willingness to forgo immediate rewards in favor of long-term growth and fulfillment. This is a difficult path to walk, especially in a world that often prioritizes short-term success over long-term integrity. But for those who choose to embrace goodness, the rewards, though delayed, are far more meaningful and enduring. The burden of expectations. Another significant problem with being good is the burden of expectations that often accompanies it. Once an individual is known for their goodness, they are often held to an impossibly high standard. They are expected to always do the right thing, to never falter or make mistakes. This can create a sense of pressure that becomes overwhelming, as the individual feels that they must constantly live up to the expectations of others. The burden of expectations can also lead to a loss of personal freedom. The individual who strives to be good may feel trapped by the need to always conform to a particular image of morality, even when they are struggling with their own doubts and insecurities. They may fear that any deviation from this image will result in judgment or disappointment from those around them. This creates a kind of moral perfectionism that is not only unrealistic but also deeply unhealthy. Furthermore, the burden of expectations can lead to a sense of isolation. The individual who is seen as good may find it difficult to relate to others who do not share the same moral convictions. They may feel that they are held to a different standard than those around them, and this can create a sense of distance and alienation. The pressure to be good can also make it difficult for the individual to ask for help or admit when they are struggling, as they fear that doing so will undermine the image of goodness that they have worked so hard to maintain. In the end, the problem with being good is that it often comes with unrealistic expectations that are impossible to meet. The individual who strives to be good must navigate the delicate balance between living a life of moral integrity and acknowledging their own humanity and imperfections. This is a difficult and often lonely path, but it is also a necessary one for those who wish to live a truly good life. Of the problem of self-righteousness. One of the greatest dangers of being good is the temptation to fall into self-righteousness. When an individual strives to live a morally upright life, they may begin to view themselves as superior to others who do not share the same values. This can lead to a sense of pride and judgment, where the individual believes that they are inherently better than those around them simply because they have chosen to be good. The problem with self-righteousness is that it undermines the very essence of goodness. True goodness is rooted in humility, compassion, and an understanding of the shared struggles and weaknesses of all human beings. When an individual becomes self-righteous, they lose sight of these qualities and instead focus on their own perceived moral superiority. This not only alienates them from others, but also creates a distorted view of what it means to be good. Furthermore, self-righteousness can lead to a kind of moral blindness. The individual who believes that they are inherently good may become unwilling to examine their own flaws or mistakes. They may justify their actions, even when they are wrong, simply because they believe that their goodness exempts them from criticism. This can lead to a lack of self-awareness and personal growth, as the individual becomes more concerned with maintaining their image of goodness than with actually living a morally upright life. Self-righteousness also creates division and conflict. The individual who views themselves as morally superior may begin to judge and condemn others who do not live up to their standards. This can lead to a lack of empathy and understanding, as the self-righteous person becomes more focused on proving their own moral worth than on building meaningful connections with others. In the end, the problem with being good is that it can easily lead to self-righteousness if one is not careful. True goodness requires humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to acknowledge one's own imperfections. Without these qualities, goodness becomes a hollow facade, a means of elevating oneself above others, rather than a genuine expression of moral integrity. And the challenge of sustaining goodness over time. The final problem with being good is the challenge of sustaining goodness over time. It is one thing to make a moral decision in a moment of clarity or conviction, but it is another thing entirely to maintain that standard of goodness throughout one's life. The world is full of distractions, temptations, and challenges that can lead even the most well-intentioned individual astray. One of the key challenges in sustaining goodness is the inevitability of moral fatigue. Over time, the effort required to consistently do the right thing can become exhausting, especially when it seems that the world does not appreciate or reward those efforts. The individual who strives to be good may find themselves growing weary of the constant struggle, and this weariness can lead to a gradual erosion of their moral convictions. Moreover, the challenges and setbacks of life can also make it difficult to maintain a commitment to goodness. When faced with personal difficulties such as loss, failure, or betrayal, the individual may begin to question whether their efforts to be good are truly worth it. In such moments of doubt, it can be tempting to abandon goodness in favor of more immediate, self-serving solutions. Another challenge in sustaining goodness is the changing nature of life itself. As individuals grow and evolve, their understanding of goodness may change as well. What was once seen as a clear moral path may become more complicated as new experiences and perspectives are gained. This can lead to confusion and uncertainty about what it means to be good, making it difficult to maintain a consistent standard of morality. In the end, the problem with being good is that it requires an ongoing commitment to moral integrity, even in the face of fatigue, doubt, and changing circumstances. This is no easy task, but it is a necessary one for those who wish to live a truly good life. Sustaining goodness over time requires patience, resilience, and a deep sense of purpose, as well as the willingness to continue striving for moral excellence, even when the rewards are not immediately apparent. The pursuit of goodness is a noble endeavor, but it is not without its challenges. It is easy to fall into the traps of superficial goodness, moral superiority, and perfectionism, but true goodness requires us to dig deeper. It calls us to be honest with ourselves, to embrace the complexity of human nature, and to recognize the importance of grace and discernment in our lives. True goodness is not about being perfect or pleasing others. It is about living in alignment with what is right and true, even when it is difficult. May we all strive to pursue this higher form of goodness, one that is rooted in integrity, 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 integrity.